Okay, Ephesians 4. We, in our verse-by-verse series here, have come to verse 17. Now, what Paul has been saying throughout chapter 4, as we from last time, is that we walk worthy of God's calling for us. The call to be a Christian is to be come and be holy through the redemption that Christ offers. Through redemption, through pardon, we can be acceptable to God, and then we become holy. Most people refer to this aspect as sanctification. In other words, they say there's justification, and then you living holy and righteously thereafter is sanctification. Well, the truth is, justification, sanctification kind of go hand in hand. If you are justified, if you are saved, you are set apart as holy. But yes, there is an aspect that we could refer to living holy as living sanctified. So the Christian call, the gospel call is a call for us we have to live up. You know, we were sinners, and God called us, He pardoned us and had mercy on us. And then there's this call, okay? We had this great mercy and forgiveness, but now we have to live up. Now, of course, never flawless, never sinless, but nevertheless it says to live holy, to be righteous. So we can, our typical behavior should become righteous. So not only we're unified, as Paul talked about, but all of this goes towards living holy because that is worthy of God's call, because He is worth it. I mean, if you're going to serve God, if you're going to be His children, according to Paul, act like it. That's what he's saying to us. So, thus, the emphasis throughout the New Testament, about the whole Bible, of righteousness. And we all fall short, but it is a constant aim to live better. Now, then he had talked about how the church benefits itself, that we can build each other up. This is through the teaching of the gospel. This is through our love towards one another. Like a body. Everything in the body is meant to have a unified purpose. You know, you can't have the hand over there doing one thing. It doesn't work that way, right? And ultimately, all of the body functions together for what? For the head, whatever the head wants to do. So, and the key there was love. Now, of course, he talked about growing up, being mature, so that we're not taken away with every doctrine that comes our way. But then the building up of ourselves of love. Okay, so in verse 17, where we pick up here, he says, Therefore, this I say, and testify in the Lord that you walk no longer just as the Gentiles also walk, in the futility of their mind, being darkened in their mind, alienated from the life of God, because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. And they, having become callous, have given themselves over to sensuality for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. But you did not learn Christ in this way. If indeed you heard Him and were taught in Him, just as truth is in Jesus, to lay aside, in reference to your former conduct, the old man, which is being corrupted in accordance with the lust of deceit, and to be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and to put on the new man, which in the likeness of God has been created in righteousness and holiness in truth. So once again, it's a section that begins with therefore. So everything I did as a recap, that's Paul's therefore. Because of all that, he says, do not walk as other Gentiles. And now he says no longer. Because they, of course, had come out of that. Most Jews who had become Christians, I mean, they lived their whole lives knowing the ethics and the standards of God. And even though they too were sinners, generally speaking, they were typically had lived more holy and more righteous than the nations, because the nations were out there without God. They didn't have Moses and all that and all this, the tradition of Judaism. So they come out of straight paganism, straight out of heathenism and all that. But he says that you no longer. Now, we, on the other hand, it is the case that in America, everybody hears about Jesus, the Bible, their whole lives. There's churches usually everywhere. But that's becoming less and less significant on people. In other words, the truth is, even though people hear about Jesus, now the pagans there and these people, I suppose really it could be the same thing somewhat. They could hear about the Jews. They've heard about the Jews. But as it is, hearing about things is very different. We have so many people, younger generations in our culture, that are grown and raised just in heathenism. And so it's very much same idea. This principle still apply. Now, I think most of us in this room grew up religious in the first place, but a lot of people haven't. But he says that you no longer walk as the Gentiles also walk. Now, of course, they were Gentiles, but what he means is the nations. Gentiles is nations. What he's saying is them people, the nations out there, which they very well knew. But he says no longer, because they were one of them. Now, that's a command. He says, I testify in the Lord. Paul was a man sent by Jesus. The need to live righteously in holiness, because it's worthy of the call, because God is worth it. It's proper to live in accordance with this calling. Is not a recommendation, There's persuasions out there, I've debated them, that say, well, you probably should be holy, but you don't have to be saved. Some of them say you don't even have to repent. Some of them say, very commonly, that once you're saved, even if you live a life of paganism after that, no matter what you do after that, well, you may get punished, you may lose some rewards, but you'll still be saved. No, there is a command and a need to live righteously. That is a necessity. But he says, I testify. Jesus himself sent Paul and to say, don't do this. Don't walk like they do anymore. Now, of course, we've said already that to walk is idiomatic of your conduct. It's how you live. People typically are walking unless a person is handicapped, walking is a very prominent aspect. To function and to do things, what do you got to do? You got to walk. You got to move, But it's our conduct. In the futility of their mind. Futility is vanity, meaninglessness, purposelessness. And isn't that really the case? Everything that is done that is outside of God and His purposes comes to nothing. So one of the things is that if there is no God, Christian apologists use this quite often, and it's really true. How could it not be? But if there is no God, there is no real meaning. There is no ultimate meaning to anything. Everything is meaningless. People will say, well, but we could still get meaning. To make life as easy and as good as possible, to make it as good for other people, to ease as much suffering as possible. Sure, even if everybody dies. Yes, but the point is that there is no ultimate meaning. Meaning, in the end, everything... Think about it. If whatever is done in whatever thing that you're talking about, whatever process, whatever activity is happening, whatever it is, if no matter what is done, the end is absolutely the same, then nothing means anything as far as what you do. If you are, think about it, if you are trying to work on a car, but you know that no matter what you're doing, it's ultimately not going to work, that nothing you're doing affects the end, then everything you're doing is meaningless. Because in the end, if there's no God, eventually the sun is going to die out. The sun ain't going to burn for eternity. it's going to die, and if it dies, all life dies, and no matter what has happened, that's the end, and everything therefore is meaningless. Ultimate purposelessness. But besides that, people's own lives, everything you do, people get lost in stuff, and it brings them to nothingness. They end up, they do whatever they do in life, and then they just die, and it becomes meaningless. Becomes meaningless. Think about it. Steve Jobs. Now, there's a man that he affected the whole world, with computers, and was extremely rich, extremely smart, probably did a lot of good for a lot of people. Generally, people like him are charitable. I don't know a lot about him. He changed the world. Him and, I forget, Bill Gates completely changed the world with computers. And of all that, think about all the time and the effort and what he put his efforts into. And Steve Jobs, and really I don't know Steve Jobs. My assumption is he wasn't a Christian, but I don't even know. But he dies, and what is all that? None of the stuff that he's done for computers to change the world means anything to him. It means absolutely nothing. Nobody's going to care about their bank accounts from the grave. People that live their life chasing pleasure means absolutely nothing. And think about, in recent times, think about this shooter. He has done nothing. He's made some people happy that a guy they didn't like was slaughtered. Okay, that's what he did. What good has it done him? He's now in prison for the rest of his life or capital punishment. So he got nothing out of it. And he's brought pain to his own family, who turned him in, by the way. He's brought pain and suffering to his family. He's brought pain and suffering to, but it has brought him to nothing. And that's what vanity. This guy was in a relationship with a transgender guy. All this stuff brings them to absolutely nothing. Meaninglessness, and when people wake up out of that, they're able to see, how many of these, on the same note, these transgender people, they eventually come out and they say, man, I was brainwashed in all this. And there's these people that were transgender and they physically transitioned, they had body parts cut off, and they come to regret it, and there's nothing they can do. They can't ever be what they were before, and they regret it. Even this recent shooter of the Catholic school who was a transgender, he regretted the fact that he had not waited. That his parents let him do this when he was young, and he felt he was brainwashed. So that's what I say. All this stuff is lost. It is meaninglessness. Everybody wants meaning. That everybody wants to search for meaning. A lot of younger people, they are searching for meaning, but they get lost on social media and all this. But a lot of times, when they're searching for meaning, they find something that looks stable. A lot of younger people will go and find Islam. You got a lot of guys out there, you may not know them, they're in the culture. You had good people like Charlie Kirk, and then you had like the antithesis, like people like Andrew Tate and them, and men flocking to them are not good people. In recent times, there's been a big increase in young males becoming Republicans, but also becoming conservative, because I think that they are looking for meaning, and they're not finding it on the other side. But all is vanity. That's what Solomon said. I believe that Ecclesiastes was written from the perspective of Solomon, who had left God. He did. It says in Chronicles, when you read that, he had many wives, he clung to them in love, and that they turned away his heart from following the Lord. And so he left the Lord for some time. But I believe that he ultimately came back. I believe there's reason to believe that. And I believe Ecclesiastes was written from his perspective after coming back and looking at him trying to find ultimate purpose, meaning, and goodness in life without God. I think that's what Ecclesiastes is. It keeps saying vanity of vanities, all is meaninglessness. As goes, the righteous man dies, the wicked man dies. And what he's saying is, if you just look at life the way it is and you don't see God and following Him, it becomes meaningless. It doesn't matter if you're evil, it doesn't matter if you're good. You die one way or the other. And he just kept. He even says in Ecclesiastes, he said, I try to search out every pleasure I could. He had gardens, and think about it, he was extremely rich. We know he had plenty of women, and so he searched out pleasure, and in the end he just kept saying, it doesn't mean anything. Even a wisdom, if it doesn't come to nothing, is meaningless. So that's why he says at the very end, here's the true meaning. Here's the true purpose, to know God and to keep His commandments. There's real meaning in that, and that's the point. And Paul says that you don't walk in the futility of their mind. They think it is meaningless. You had lots of philosophers out there in the Gentile culture, and they were doing lots of thinking and figuring out stuff. Some of it was good, a lot of it was not. But what good does it ever come, really, ultimately, if it doesn't lead them to God? You can have even good philosophy, but if you don't have God, it doesn't mean anything. There's a lot of, I'm thinking of people, just we see in the media so much. There's a lot of people out there that spend a lot of time and effort on political agendas like saving the environment or stopping pollution, and which I'm all for, not polluting the environment and all that. They'll attach to these political things, and they're not Christian, and most of the time they're not even good people. And then, in the end, what good will it be? I mean, so what? But okay, Paul's saying, you don't have to do that anymore. Shouldn't do that anymore. Now you can walk in meaning. He says, being darkened in their mind, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them. In other words, because of not knowing. And most of the time, it's a willful ignorance. That's our culture too. I'm telling you, even with God's knowledge all around us, people have been darkened in their mind. And just think about the evidence of that. And I've been saying this because it's so prominent, but this transgender mentality. Think about how darkened means the lights are out. When you can present yourselves as something everybody, including you, know that you are not. I mean, that's what young children do. And we understand when young children do it. But when you have an adult man saying that he's a woman, you are just walking in complete meaninglessness. I mean, it's like no lights on anymore. To the point where we start surgically transitioning our bodies and trying to get young children to do it because it's an agenda. The lights are out. And alienated from the life of God, such people certainly don't have it. They can get it, just come to Christ. And sometimes you have to hit rock bottom. Because of the hardness of their heart, and they having become callous. I think King James says past feeling, same idea, right? Becoming callous. That's what happens. Hearts become hard. And what is that? Because the heart is just the mind, right? That's really what it is. Being hard-hearted means that you can emphasize different aspects. But it's the idea, number one, of not having compassion or empathy, not being able to see the goodness or the suffering in another person and to be considering of them. It's also the idea that your heart, when something is hard, it can't move much, obviously, either for empathy or for changing. That you're set in your ways and there's no way out of it. And it's not impossible. Because let's remember that most people in Jesus' ministry rejected Him by the end and had hard hearts, as it says. But then a lot of these same people on the day of Pentecost, their hearts were softened. How did that happen? Well, sometimes it takes big events. When you finally wake up to the truth enlighten them. Wait a minute, we killed the Messiah. And what do? That kind of breaks away that hard flesh around their heart. So you could have a hard heart And God knows how to break the hardness around it. But then sometimes people just keep going. And it becomes harder. It takes, see, the harder your heart gets, the more it takes to get you going the other way. That's the toughness of it. Because the human mind is designed to set patterns and to continue on with them. But that's what he says. That's what happens to them. They have hard hearts and they become callous. Now, I recently did a podcast. I talked about mental illness. This term is used so often. And it can be defined. It's kind of an ambiguous term because it can be defined in various ways. Most of the time, it's just thrown out there for behavior that is not good, like the school shooters or something like that. We say, we have to talk more about mental illness. And what in the world is it? I mean, it depends on how you define it. Well, if you defined it as something like schizophrenia or something like that, I mean, there's things that go wrong with the brain, Alzheimer's, dementia. But that's a physical problem in the brain. But when we talk about mental illness, most of the time that's just a phrase for we don't really know what's going on, but something's wrong. Because mental has to do with the mind. Well, the mind is affected by the brain, but if there's nothing physically wrong with the brain, then it's not that there's a mental sickness. You know what it is? People can be evil. That's what it is. These shooters and stuff like that, they're not sick in their mind. They're evil, and their hearts are hard. A person that cannot feel empathy is just what the Bible calls a hard heart. It means that they've persisted in a way of thinking and a way of not doing things for so long that they've lost this ability. And that's what the Bible calls evil. Evil is just simply that which is contrary to God and His character. Okay, well, to use our example, our very present example, I just read in the news that the shooter is not even cooperating. That's what they're saying. He's not cooperating. Well, here's a guy that just brought tremendous amounts of suffering to a woman and 2 children, at least throughout their lives. They may not be suffering now. So Charlie Kirk had 2 young children. 2, I think it was 2, maybe it was more, but it was at least 2, and they were younger than 5. 3 and 1, I guess. And so, I mean, their whole lives, they're going to see a man that they can never know, and he was their father. And if you saw I saw the speech of the wife she gave, and it's just the amount of suffering that is inflicted on people. And if you cannot think about that, if that cannot connect with you, it's because you have a hard heart, which is just figurative, meaning that you are a person who is trained not to care or think. You've trained yourself. You've lost this consideration. You're a person who's self-absorbed. And it's not just transgenderism, obviously. I mean, it's all types of evil people. But I think modern transgenderism is an extreme example, or I should say a great example of what it means to be self-absorbed. Because that's exactly what they are. It's just completely self-absorbed. It's about me. You have to affirm what I say that I am a woman, and you have to tell me to validate what I feel about myself. It's just me, and that's what it is. They shoot people to make statements that affect them. As I said, it's very self-absorbed. I remember before transgenderism became a big thing, I remember at Walmart, I saw a man walking around in a dress. And, by its very nation, someone who wants attention. If a man, especially at that time, but even now, at least in our town, walking around in a dress is just to draw everybody's attention. It's just self-absorbed. Never believe somebody like that when they say, I just want to be, I'm not, I don't want you to look at me. They're trying to draw attention is the truth of the matter. As I said, if everybody's wearing white and you wear black, and you go to the crowd, well, you're going to stand out, and it's got to be on purpose. Unless you just happen to find yourself in white. But you don't just happen to be a man who finds yourself in a dress. You do it to draw attention and to make a statement. But very self-absorbed. But all kinds of evil is self-absorbed. Murder, whoever murders, Well, obviously, by its definition, is very selfish, right? When you murder somebody, you're not just stealing their stuff, you're taking everything from them. And you're taking them from everybody around them. Murder, of course. But that's what it means to be outside of God, and to be doing all these things is to be self-absorbed. So I don't care too much for the term mental illness. I don't think it's helpful at all. I think it comes from the mentality of the medical culture in which we have, that looks at people as merely physical people. We're just physical creatures. The medical community does not consider being a spirit or the immaterial part of man, so it just sees man as a biological machine, and therefore, if he's shooting people, it's because there's something functionally wrong with the machine. And thus, it's a illness, a sickness. No, it's evil. That's what it is. Again, I do recognize there are problems with people that they get sick. I mentioned some sicknesses. And if you affect the brain, you're going to affect people's mind. I mean, there ain't no doubt about that. I think there's legitimate people that have a problem with their mind because of their brain. In verse 19, and they have becoming callous, have given themselves over to sensuality for the practices of every kind of impurity with greediness. Being callous and being given over go hand in hand. Because what does it mean to be given over? If you give yourselves over, you're delivering yourselves into the control of something else. In Romans chapter 1, it talks about homosexuality. It kind of uses that as an example for the rest of the sins that it also mentions, but it highlights that as what really bad happens to people. And I'll just read that. This also is very, relevant to our modern times. But he talked about how people could see and understand that God is there from creation, to know God is all-powerful, and that they reject the information that they have. And in his time became idolaters, which is the same thing going on today. But in verse 22 it says, professing to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image. There's the idolatry. In the likeness of corruptible man, and of birds, and four-footed animals, and crawling creatures. And it says, therefore, God gave them over in the lust of their hearts to impurity. That's kind of the same wording we just had. Here it's God giving them over. There it's them giving themselves over. I think it's the same idea, though. I think when God makes the decision to let a person be self-delivered, I think he's making an executive decision. Now, he could do something actively and directly. I think with Pharaoh as an example, God was making a decision to use Pharaoh's evil heart against him by pushing his buttons. You push his buttons, and he knew that he would react stronger and stronger according to his own desires, and he was using that. My favorite example of Pharaoh, people debate on what it means he hardened Pharaoh's heart. Because, now the reason I bring up Pharaoh, and people debate this and they go back and forth with this. You have multiple times it says Pharaoh hardened his heart. But then you have multiple times it says Pharaoh hardened his own heart. God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So you have both. And so there's different ideas. Okay, so who's doing what? I mean, it says Pharaoh did it, God did it. Some people say, well, Pharaoh did it sometimes and then God started to do it after that. I think it means the same thing. I think God is hardening Pharaoh's heart in the sense that he's pushing Pharaoh's buttons, provoking his pride, making him angry and humiliating him, and it's causing Pharaoh to dig his heels in and thus harden his own heart. So Pharaoh hardening his own heart is because God is provoking him and he's using this. So God is hardening his heart, but it ultimately amounts to the same thing. I think that's what's happening here. But my example of that is this, and I like this example. Exodus 14. After the plagues, most of the plagues have gone. The firstborn of Egypt, they're already gone. He's already released Pharaoh. has already released Israel, and they're already on their way. Okay, seemingly the end of the story, so you think, right? And it says, God tells Moses to maneuver the people in such a way that it makes them look like they're lost and confused. That's what he tells them. And God says, and Pharaoh will think basically that you're lost and confused. And he will come out and fight against you. And it says, I will harden his heart. So there's a great example of God doing this. And yet Pharaoh is doing it to himself. You see, God is giving Pharaoh a reason to do what he already wants to do. But he's got no reason to do what he wants to do, which is kill Israel, because he's been defeated. His child is dead. The people are gone. There's nothing left for him to do. But when God makes it look like they're lost and confused, Pharaoh thinks, this is it. God has left them. That's what he says. And thus he stiffens up and says, let's go get our vengeance. So God is a mastermind. He knows how to use people's evil against them. So in this case, he uses Pharaoh's own heart against them. And so here we see God, it says God gave them over. And to do what? It says, to follow their impurity. It says, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. In other words, so that they would come to a point where they're doing these shameful things and they don't even realize, and it really is a shameful thing. But it says, for they exchange the truth of God for a lie, worship, serve the creature rather than the Creator. It goes on to say, verse 26, for this reason God gave them over to dishonorable passions. Their females exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. And in the same way, also the males abandoned the natural function of the female and burned in their desire for one another, males with males committing indecent acts and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error. In other words, they're paying for their evil choices previously. They don't realize it. They think they're doing exactly what they want, but they're actually paying a penalty. The fact that they could do the things that they're doing means God has given them over to be punished. And the punishment is, this is where you end up, in such horrible, shameful, miserable conditions, and you don't even know it. Once again in verse 28, and just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them over to an unfit mind to do those things which are not proper. And then it goes on to talk about various sins. But this is the same idea, but in Ephesians then. It says they gave themselves over, and I think it's the same idea. God is making a decision that, okay, this is what you want to do. I'm going to pull the restraints. I'm going to let it be. Although sometimes, this is not to say that if God makes a decision to give them over, He may send something that will speed up the process even. Talks about that in Thessalonians, where God, for those who do not receive the love of the truth, God sent a diluting influence so that they would believe a lie. Now, they already wanted to believe it. It says they did not receive a love for the truth and took pleasure in unrighteousness, so He gives them a reason to clench onto it harder. This is what God does. Sometimes He gives people over. And here, it says, these people walking in vanity and have callous heart give themselves over, meaning they deliver themselves over to the mastery of another. Think about people when they become addicted to something. Heroin, especially drugs, because actually drugs have physical effects. I mean, it's a physical thing. It's actually chemistry working at that point. People give themselves over, making the choice to do it. The more they do the drugs, the harder it is to get along or to get off. And you become a slave. You give themselves over. Or gambling. Now, gambling doesn't have the chemical effects of drugs, but you see how addictive it can be. I mean, people they'll give up, they'll spend all their life fortune for it. They'll spend hundreds of thousands of dollars over the year and win like $500 and they think that they've gained something because it's an addiction. Or people that are addicted to alcohol, pornography being the same way. I mean, they say pornography as a horrible taskmaster. That's what it happens, is you become addicted and a slave. to their own passions. The idea is that people's appetites and desires become their masters. Isn't that what happens in our day and culture? Again, to use our ever-present examples now, but transgenderism are the people that have just become so enslaved by such an interest in being something they're not, to the point that they start modifying their own body. And I mean, just to be honest, most of the time, I mean, they just look hideous, looking like. All right, and on that note, so many. It's especially true with celebrities, but the addiction to youth, because your desire to be beautiful and pretty, all these, and you see it with celebrities especially, but they just keep filling their skin with these chemicals and stuff, and they look like monsters. You ever see these pictures? I mean, they just look horrible. You can see actresses that once looked beautiful. Now you look at them, and it's just like the Elephant Man or something. I mean, it's just grotesque the way that they become, and they can't. They think they're still looking young or something, but people just are given over to these pleasures and carnal appetites, which I'm going to remind everybody that in these appetites that we have, are, if they're carried out wisely and appropriate manners, are good. I've said that a number of times, I know, but I just want everybody to remember. I mean, it's not like God has given us evil desires, but it's just like a child. A child has a desire for candy, right? Which is, it's okay. I mean, even adults like candy. God has given us pleasure for things like sweets, but the child has to be controlled, or he uses it in a way that is harmful to him. And it's like that with every desire and appetite and interest we have. It has to be controlled, executed in the proper way. But people become slaves to these things, and they spend their whole lives chasing their pleasures. And it says, giving themselves over to sensuality, for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. But you did not learn Christ in this way, if indeed. Now, this is very relevant to all of us, of course, now we live in this day and age, but very relevant to these, because remember, these are new Christians. They've lived their whole lives in these things. It's just as relevant to us, of course, in the sense that we always have to be on guard. But, of course, there's also lots of new converts to Christianity today. But he says, you did not learn Christ in this way, if indeed you heard him and were taught in him, just as truth is in Jesus, to lay aside in reference to your former conduct the old man, which is being corrupted in accordance with lust of deceit. Lust of deceit. Think about that phrase. Lust of deceit. You know, to become mastered by carnal appetites or desires is deceitful. These things deceive you. And even things that, I mean, think about the things people do. I mean, honestly, I know lots of people smoke, but just looking at something simple and small like that, I mean, the deception of it, I mean, the craving people have, I mean, how deceitful it really is. Cigarettes kill people quite often. I mean, in my family, I've had, my dad, of course, died of heart disease. My grandpa had cancer. He also had some heart disease. And I talked to my doctor recently too, and then we were talking about this very thing. And all of which had heart disease, and the common factor was smoking. They smoked for many, many years. It's deceitful, and even the people that smoke don't want to do it. It's deceitful in the sense that I'm bringing myself pleasure by sticking this smoking stick in my mouth, and it is. It's just deceit. Alcohol, you know, drinking. People that become addicted and drunkards, man, they look how deceived they are, destroying their own livers. They know the harm that it comes, but it's just deceitful. Well, this will bring me this moment of pleasure, and you become blind by it, or whatever it may be. That, you know, these people that it really is blindness and deceit. This guy that shot Charlie Kirk, I mean, these people that assassinate and kill other people, they just are deceived into thinking that this is in any way useful or good for them. It's just deception. Modifying our bodies is just self-deception that this is going to be good for you. That's why people wake up out of it. It's so deceptive that it will have parents modifying their own body, their own children's bodies. It is the deception of lust. Lusts are deceitful when they're not controlled with wisdom. Chasing pleasures will kill you. I mean, it often does, right? He says, you do not learn this way as the truth is in Christ. That really is the case. In Christ is truth. Everything that I've just been talking about is just the truth of the matter. A lot of times people think when we talk about truth in the Bible and truth in Christ, we're thinking about these theological propositions like, okay, Christ is God. Okay, now that's important and that is true. But that's just kind of revealed. You wouldn't know that unless it was revealed. But we also see these other things that have to do with our everyday life, morality. True wisdom is found in Christ. It's not just theological truths. It's the truths of life are all around us. So I'll give you an example. Again, this was my last podcast was on this. And I've talked about this before. You know, when Jesus talked about hate. Now, I talked about this on my podcast because it's relevant to what we're talking about. So, there, as you know, and it's not surprising that there are lots of people happy and celebrating the fact that this Charlie Kirk was killed. And I've even had people online that I know or that are on my Facebook. I got lots of people that I don't know saying that, you know, they don't have any sympathy for the guy at all. They don't care. It's because they don't like his views, that kind of thing. But John, 1 John chapter 3:15 says, he that hates his brother is a murderer. Now, he got that from Jesus, of course, when he heard him talk in the Sermon on the Mount, who said, he that is angry, you have heard that it was said to those of the ancients, you shall not murder, but I tell you that he that is angry with his brother, it says to him, Raka, and then fool, he says, he shall be delivered over. You read those passages. So in the Old Testament, those who committed murder were tried. But Jesus says, he that says to his brother, Raka, and fool, he's going to be tried. He's going to be delivered over to judgment. Now, what's his point? Well, it's a little easier to understand when you see what, because you think, well, everybody's angry with somebody of something, right? I mean, even Jesus got angry. So what is Jesus saying? Well, John really makes it a little bit more simpler. He says, he who hates his brother is a murderer. Now, what is hate? If you think of hate as an emotion only, you're going to miss the point. We think of hate as really the strong negative emotions we have towards people. And that is certainly a result of hate. And we kind of use it loosely too, because we even talk about, oh, I hate this food, I hate this TV show, I hate this music. We use hate very loose. But you think about what hate really is. And remember, I'm talking about this because this shows true wisdom, and the wisdom is found in Jesus when he was teaching these things. Hate is not to value or consider another person's life. Or it's really to devalue them as to bring them less than human, or for what their human life is. So you think about it. This is an example I've always given, but a stranger that walks up to a guy that he's never met and shoots him dead to take his wallet. He had no ill feelings for the guy. He didn't have strong emotion. He had no emotions. That's the point. He was indifferent. He did not value that guy's life any more than the money that he took from him. He has devalued his life. That's what hate is, which often does result in these strong emotions. And he says you're a murderer. Why is that? Well, you take someone who has murdered somebody, okay, like the guy that is in the news now. He's actually committed murder. And you take another guy, he hasn't committed murder, but say he's celebrating the death of someone who was murdered. What's the difference when you look at their hearts? What's the difference? as far as who they are, what difference is there? There's no difference. It's just that one had the bravery to shoot somebody. I say bravery, just meaning he was able to do what the other person just has in his heart. The guy was actually a coward. You shoot somebody and then you run away and you hide. It's just cowardice. But the point is, their hearts are still the same. Still the same. So when Jesus said, he that is angry with his brother, I'm going to say this. I'm not going to get into this because I don't have the time here. It's already running a little late here. But you think about it. Now in the King James, I think it says without a cause, he that is angry without his brother. I have reason to believe that was added so people can make sense of it. Because people think, well, you're always angry. Or rather, people will, understandably, everybody gets angry. And so he has to mean like without a good reason. And so that was added. I don't believe that's the case. And most modern, I think, versions, they leave that out. It's not. I don't think that was actually there. Because what Jesus is talking about, there's never a reason. But he says, he that is angry. And then he mentions name calling. So the kind of thing that Jesus is talking about is the hate that John's talking about. He means when you're angry at a person to the point that you have no more value for their souls. I mean, just like you get angry at a person, you wish death upon them. Or you're so mad at a person that when they are harmed, you rejoice over it. And we're not talking about justice. It is okay to rejoice when justice has been done because justice has been done. But it doesn't mean we don't get angry at people that have done wrong to us and we wish death upon them because of that. You hate a guy because he's done you so much wrong. I wish that guy was dead. I wish that he would just walk across the road and a bus would hit him. That's the kind of anger Jesus is talking about. That is to devalue his life. Now he mentions name calling, which Paul is going to talk into, and that's why this is very much, he's going to talk about here in just a second. That's why it's very nice. People get mad and they start using labels to attack. And even though we're not going to have the time to delve into it too much in Ephesians, but it's going to be the same idea. It's one thing to use a name because you think, I need to identify what is happening here. Jesus called the Pharisees fools because they were. He wasn't doing it because he was mad or trying to diminish them. He was doing it so that they would be known as fools. But so often is the case, we get mad and we attack people verbally because we want to hurt them. We want to mark them down. You're just stupid. That's because we're trying to bring them down. We're trying to lower them. That's what Jesus is talking about. Now, we're going to get into it probably next time, but he goes on later to talk about in verse 29, let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but only such a word that is good for building up. Now, sometimes to say what people truly are is so that they can see it. If someone is being abusive, you say, you're being abusive, you're an abuser. That's because they need to know it. The truth needs to be known. But let's just acknowledge the fact most of the time in arguments, names are called to attack, to diminish, to hurt. I'm angry and I want you to know because by giving you names. But that's what he said here. He said, guess why he goes on to talk about anger. But to stick where we are, that's the kind of anger that we're talking about when Jesus says, he that calls his brother a fool. In other words, he's diminishing him from anger. You're not doing anything different than a murderer does in the sense that you are diminishing a human being made in the image of God. That's the kind of anger that Jesus is saying, let's get that out of here. Let's get rid of that. And Paul is saying here that these are the kind of people doing the same thing. And now I mentioned that to talk about the wisdom in Christ. Truly knowing what hate is comes from listening to Jesus. But moving back here to finish this little section though, he says that they are being corrupted and to be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Change the way you think. Instead of doing things this way that they have done, or perhaps we have done, he says, you have to think differently. You have to be different and to put on the new man, which in the likeness of God has been created, in righteousness and the holiness of the truth. To live in light of the truth, we have to live and think. There's always an emphasis on the mind, renewing the mind. And why is that? Because it is possible to live righteously outwardly. Meaning to do the right things is not all that difficult. That goes back to what I said with Jesus. He said, right before he said that I was mentioning in the Sermon on the Mount, he said, unless your righteousness surpasses the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, how does that relate to the very next thing he talks about with, you have heard that it was said, you shall not murder, but I say to you that he that is angry. He goes on to say, you've heard, do not commit adultery, but he that looks upon a woman of lust has already committed adultery in his heart. What's his point? The scribes and the Pharisees did the right things and refrain from the right bad things. That is, they didn't commit murder, generally speaking. Now, in some cases they did. Obviously, they would go on to do that, right? But generally speaking, they weren't killing people. Generally speaking, they weren't committing adultery. Because they were doing it physically, but their heart was corrupted. They hated people. They valued human life. So they weren't committing murder, because it's easy really not to commit murder. All you have to do is just not kill somebody. Most human beings are not killing other people. But it's just like these people celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk or being indifferent. Their heart is no different than the murderer, but yes, they have an outward righteousness. They're doing the right thing in the sense that they're not carrying it out. That's what the Pharisees did. Their hearts were corrupt. They were just doing the right things, generally speaking. And he's saying, no, you got to be more than that. You have to actually be righteous, purely righteous, inside and out. That's why the emphasis in the New Testament about the mind, he talks about your behavior, as he did here in Ephesians, and then he talks about the mind. The behavior has to come from a change of mind. So, as we ended here, that's the point. We have to think, how should I as a Christian think? How do I think? Because my behavior, that is the essential truth here, that your behavior will flow from how you think. Now, people can act, granted, but that just flows from how they think. They are acting because they think corruptly, and they think, I have to look a certain way. It still flows from the way they think. So it starts with a change of mind, because it's part of being righteous and holy. That's our time here this morning.